What happens when a woman who once seemed untouchable in the world of royalty suddenly discovers that every privilege she ever took for granted has been stripped away? Imagine waking up one morning to find that your visa, the very document that allowed you to live, work, and thrive in the United Kingdom, no longer exists. Imagine realizing that the king himself has personally ensured that your legal protection is gone, leaving you vulnerable to consequences you never imagined. This is exactly the scenario Meghan Markle is facing right now. Yes, you heard that correctly. Meghan Markle, the former Duchess of Sussex, has had her UK visa revoked. King Charles has ended her privileges. And now, she faces consequences that could reshape her life, her career, and the carefully crafted public image she has worked so hard to maintain. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The first question that probably came to your mind is, why now? Why would King Charles take this unprecedented step after years of tension, media storms, and public speculation surrounding the Sussexes? After all, Meghan and Harry left the royal family years ago. They've built their life in California, far from Buckingham Palace, far from royal duties, and far from the eyes of the British public. Yet here we are. Documents have surfaced. Evidence has been verified. And the stakes have never been higher. The timing is shocking, and the implications are even more shocking. To truly understand the gravity of this moment, we need to rewind to a series of events that most people only heard about in whispers. Meghan's life since marrying into the royal family has been a careful balancing act. Public appearances, charity initiatives, interviews, television specials, all curated to maintain a sense of authority, relevance, and independence. But behind the glossy magazine covers and social media posts, tensions have been simmering. The royal family, led by King Charles, has been closely observing every move, every interview, every public statement, and every perceived misstep. And it seems that after years of watching, the king finally decided that enough was enough. Imagine the shock inside the Sussex household when legal notices started arriving. Letters that no publicist could spin, no media team could soften. One moment, Meghan believed she was secure. The next, she realized the rules had changed. Her residency in the UK was no longer guaranteed. The privileges she once enjoyed were officially revoked. And King Charles made it clear that this wasn't a symbolic gesture. This was a warning, a declaration, and a signal that the royal family is willing to enforce boundaries that even high-profile figures cannot escape. Now, you might be thinking, surely this is just another headline. Meghan will figure it out, issue a statement, and move on. But that's not how this unfolds. There are layers to this story that even the sharpest royal watchers didn't see coming. The revocation isn't just about immigration law. It's about power. It's about consequences. And it's about a family that, for centuries, has maintained strict control over its image, privileges, and influence. The stakes are enormous. And the question every royal insider is asking is, how far will the consequences go, and who will be affected next? Meghan Markle is no stranger to controversy. From her early days as an actress in Los Angeles to her whirlwind courtship with Prince Harry, her life has been under intense public scrutiny. Every step, every outfit, every public appearance has been analyzed, dissected, and, at times, criticized. But nothing could prepare her, or the world, for a move like this. King Charles's decision to revoke her visa represents more than a legal action. It's a statement, a demonstration that even those who seem untouchable, even those with global influence, are not above the rules. And for Meghan, the message is clear. The days of operating without consequence are over. Let's consider what this means on a personal level. For Meghan, the UK has not just been a place to live. It's been a stage for influence, a hub for her charitable work, and a symbol of her status in the world. The revocation of her visa cuts her off from that sphere entirely. It limits her ability to travel freely, to participate in public life, and to maintain the connections that have been central to her image as a global figure. It also sends a chilling message to other high-profile figures. No matter your fame, no matter your alliances, the law and the monarchy's authority can reach you. But there's more to the story than just legal documents and privileges. There's a human element, a personal drama that has been building behind closed doors. Sources say that the reaction within the Sussex household has been intense, emotional, and filled with tension. Harry, who has stood by Meghan through every storm, reportedly struggled to reconcile his loyalty to her with his loyalty to the family he was born into. And Meghan, who has always projected confidence and independence, is now confronted with a reality that tests both her resilience and her carefully cultivated public image. You might be wondering, what triggered King Charles to act now, rather than months or even years ago? According to insiders, it wasn't just one incident. It was a series of actions, statements, and public appearances that collectively pushed the king to make an unprecedented move. Every detail has been scrutinized. Every interview, every social media post, every charitable announcement. And when combined with verified evidence presented to the king, the decision became inevitable. In short, the situation reached a tipping point. And once it did, there was no turning back. The consequences of this action are likely to ripple far beyond Meghan herself. Public opinion in the UK, already divided on the Sussexes, may shift further. Media outlets will dissect every detail. Political figures and advisors may weigh in. And for Meghan and Harry, this could mark a turning point in their relationship with the monarchy, the media, and the world at large. The ripple effects are unpredictable, and that unpredictability is part of what makes this story so compelling. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of all is the secrecy and timing of the move. This wasn't announced publicly at first. The revocation of Meghan's visa came quietly, through official channels, leaving her team scrambling to understand the implications. Only after leaks began to surface did the public begin to realize the severity of the situation. And as the news spread, the question on everyone's mind was, what happens next? How far will the consequences go? And could this escalate even further, affecting not just Meghan, but Harry, their children, and their broader circle of influence? It's easy to look at headlines and see this as another royal feud or celebrity scandal. But make no mistake, this is far bigger than that. This is a moment in history where the monarchy is asserting its authority in a way that few could have predicted. It's a dramatic, unprecedented action with consequences that could reshape the narrative around the Sussexes for years to come. And while Meghan has faced challenges before, this situation is different. This is about power, privilege, and accountability at the highest level. Now, before we move forward, ask yourself, if someone with Meghan's resources, influence, and fame can face this kind of consequence, what does it say about the limits of power? What does it say about the royal family's willingness to enforce rules, regardless of public perception? And perhaps most importantly, how will Meghan respond, and what will Harry do next? By the end of this video, you'll have a complete picture of the events leading up to Meghan's visa revocation, the reactions behind palace doors, the strategies employed by her team, and the consequences that are still unfolding. You'll see the drama, the tension, the emotions, and the unexpected twists that make this one of the most shocking royal stories in recent memory. But for now, consider this. The letter that arrived at Meghan's door was just the beginning. The real shock, the consequence that no one could have anticipated, was yet to come. It all started with a knock. A simple, almost unremarkable knock on the Sussex household door in California. Yet, for Meghan Markle, this knock marked the beginning of a storm she never saw coming. Imagine, for a moment, standing in your home, surrounded by your belongings, your career, your carefully curated life, and suddenly realizing that a single piece of paper could change everything. This wasn't an invitation. This wasn't a press release or a fan letter. This was a letter that carried the weight of power, authority, and consequences. A letter bearing a signature that could alter the course of her life. The envelope was official, its paper thick and embossed with symbols that immediately signaled importance. Meghan's heart raced as she tore it open. The words inside were concise, but their implications were staggering. Her UK visa, the very document that allowed her legal residency and certain privileges in the United Kingdom, had been revoked. The notice came directly from a government office, authorized and backed by the monarchy. The signature at the bottom wasn't just any official. It was King Charles himself. Take a moment to digest that. King Charles, the monarch of a nation that has been closely observing the Sussexes' every move for years, personally authorized the revocation of Meghan's visa. For anyone else, this might seem like a dry bureaucratic action. For Meghan Markle, it was a seismic shift. One moment, she had freedom of movement, legal protection, and royal connections that provided insulation from ordinary consequences. The next, she was staring at a reality where none of that could save her. How did it come to this? Meghan had always assumed that her royal connection, combined with her public image and international influence, provided a shield. After all, she had married into the most visible family in the world. She had received titles, been granted privileges, and enjoyed access that few could imagine. Yet, as she read the letter, it became terrifyingly clear that her assumptions were no longer valid. The privileges she once relied upon were gone, and the consequences outlined in the letter hinted at more than just legal inconvenience. They hinted at a reckoning. Inside the Sussex residence, the atmosphere was tense. Harry, always the protector, was immediately at her side. The couple exchanged a glance filled with unspoken concern. How had this happened? Why now? And most importantly, what did it mean for their life, their family, and their future? Questions piled on questions, and the letter itself offered few answers beyond the immediate declaration. The visa was revoked, effective immediately. The wording of the letter was formal, almost cold. It cited legal statutes, referenced royal discretion, and left no room for ambiguity. Meghan's legal team, when called in, confirmed the severity of the situation. Unlike previous controversies that could be spun, negotiated, or delayed, this action was final. The visa revocation was not temporary. It was not subject to debate, and it carried implications that would reach far beyond the borders of the United Kingdom. But what triggered this extreme action? Sources close to the palace suggest that it was the culmination of a series of events, both public and private. Meghan's media projects, public statements, and social engagements had been scrutinized meticulously. Every interview, every social media post, every charitable initiative was analyzed for potential risks to the monarchy. The palace, according to insiders, viewed the revocation as a necessary measure to assert authority and maintain the integrity of the royal household. One might wonder, couldn't this have been resolved privately? After all, the Sussexes had previously left the UK voluntarily, establishing a life in the United States. The expectation, some might assume, would be that any potential disputes could be handled behind closed doors, diplomatically, or through legal counsel. But the reality, as the letter made painfully clear, was that the palace had reached a point where private resolution was no longer sufficient. The decision to revoke the visa was strategic, deliberate, and, according to experts, unprecedented in modern royal history. As Meghan processed the information, she realized another shocking aspect of the situation. The revocation was immediate. There was no grace period, no warning, no phased approach. One moment, she was able to travel to the UK freely, to participate in engagements, and to maintain a presence that reinforced her influence. The next, she faced the stark reality that her access was entirely cut off. Legal advisors emphasized the seriousness. Any attempt to enter the UK without proper documentation could lead to enforcement actions, potential detention at the border, and other legal complications. The letter, however, was only the beginning. Its arrival set off a chain reaction that would engulf Meghan, Harry, and their team. Emergency meetings were called. Lawyers scrambled to interpret the letter, draft responses, and explore any avenues for appeal. Public relations teams worked around the clock, trying to anticipate media reaction and frame a narrative that could mitigate the fallout. The situation was chaotic, intense, and emotionally draining. For Meghan, who had always projected composure and confidence, this moment was both personal and professional, a stark reminder that power and privilege can be fleeting. Behind the scenes, sources indicate that Harry was equally alarmed. The king's decision was not a mere bureaucratic maneuver. It was a direct message to the couple. Harry, who had long navigated the delicate balance between loyalty to his family and support for Meghan, now faced a dilemma of unprecedented scale. The protective instincts that had defined much of his public persona were challenged by a reality in which even his influence could not shield the family from consequences. While Meghan absorbed the legal implications, she also grappled with the emotional weight of the action. For someone accustomed to managing public perception, controlling narratives, and maintaining influence, This development represented a loss of agency. She realized that her options were limited, her status altered, and her influence threatened. The letter symbolized not just a legal revocation, but an erosion of the protective structures she had relied upon. It's important to note that such an action against a former royal is virtually unheard of. Historically, individuals who married into the royal family, even if they later stepped back from official duties, retained certain privileges, including residency rights, access to ceremonial events, and diplomatic protections. The decision to revoke Meghan's visa challenges this precedent, signaling a new era in which the monarchy is asserting boundaries with unprecedented firmness. Public reaction, though initially muted due to the confidential nature of the notice, was predicted to be explosive. Social media analysts immediately flagged potential trends. Hashtags, speculation, and rumors would spread rapidly once the information leaked. The narrative was primed for sensational coverage, and insiders expected that the global audience would respond with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and debate. For Meghan and Harry, controlling the narrative would be a monumental task. Yet the content of the letter raised even more questions than it answered. Why had the decision been made at this particular time? What specific actions or behaviors triggered such a strong response from King Charles? And most intriguingly, what consequences would follow beyond the immediate revocation? Legal experts suggested that the letter hinted at additional measures. Consequences that could impact Meghan's ability to engage with business ventures, attend public events, or even influence international organizations. As the couple sat together, the weight of the situation settled over them. The reality was clear. The letter was not just a notice, it was a declaration. It was a signal that the royal family, under King Charles's leadership, was willing to enforce consequences even against those with fame, influence, and global recognition. And while Meghan had faced public scrutiny before, this moment was uniquely personal and inescapable. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the letter was what it didn't say. It didn't offer compromise. It didn't propose negotiation. And it certainly didn't hint at leniency. The revocation was final. And yet, the tone suggested that this action was only the beginning. The real consequences, the ones that would ripple through Meghan's personal and professional life, were hinted at but not fully disclosed. As the news began to seep into the public sphere, the first leaks created immediate shockwaves. Reporters reached out to palace sources. Analysts speculated on potential repercussions. Social media buzzed with commentary from royal enthusiasts, critics, and casual observers alike. For Meghan, the flood of attention compounded the emotional and legal intensity of the situation. Every eye was now on her response, every tweet analyzed, every statement scrutinized. And while the Sussexes prepared for a response, the palace was already strategizing its next steps. Sources suggest that King Charles's advisors anticipated media backlash and prepared contingencies for public relations, legal enforcement, and diplomatic messaging. The letter, while formally revoking the visa, was also a precursor to further measures, ensuring that the monarchy maintained control over both narrative and authority. Meghan's team tried to formulate a plan. Legal experts debated potential appeals. PR consultants brainstormed ways to frame the situation sympathetically. But as the hours passed, it became clear that this was unlike any crisis they had faced before. The combination of legal finality, royal authority, and global attention created a perfect storm, one that required swift action and strategic thinking. Yet, even in this whirlwind, Meghan's initial reaction revealed a crucial truth. She understood that influence and privilege do not equate to invulnerability. The letter forced a confrontation with reality, one that demanded reflection, resilience, and a re-evaluation of her strategies. For someone who had navigated fame, media scrutiny, and high-stakes negotiations for years, this was a stark and humbling moment. And just when it seemed the situation couldn't become more intense, sources indicate that an unexpected twist occurred. Details emerged suggesting that the revocation of Meghan's visa was linked to additional, previously undisclosed evidence that neither she nor Harry had anticipated. This new information had the potential to escalate the situation dramatically, introducing consequences that reached far beyond immigration and residency. The knock on the door that started it all was just the beginning. The letter was only the first wave in a series of events that would challenge Meghan's influence, test Harry's loyalty, and ultimately reveal the lengths to which King Charles is willing to go to assert control. What could push a king, someone whose life is built on centuries of tradition, protocol, and measured control, to take an action that shakes the foundations of a royal household? King Charles, long perceived as a patient, diplomatic figure, rarely prone to impulsive decisions, reached a breaking point. And once he did, there was no turning back. To understand this moment, we have to look at the build-up. For years, the relationship between the monarchy and Meghan Markle has been tense. From her first appearances as a bride-to-be, her every word, outfit, and gesture was scrutinized not just by the public, but by palace insiders. Protocols were expected to be followed, traditions respected, and public behavior aligned with the monarchy's image. Meghan, fiercely independent and outspoken, often challenged these unspoken rules. While some admired her courage and initiative, others viewed her actions as disruptive, sometimes even threatening to the institution she had married into. King Charles, as heir and now monarch, had watched carefully. He observed the media storms, the controversies, the interviews, and the social media campaigns. He saw the division that the Sussexes' public statements caused within the family and among the British public. He knew that every delay, every concession, risked undermining the monarchy's authority. And while many thought he would tolerate Meghan's boldness, the reality was that patience has its limits, even for a monarch. The breaking point, according to palace insiders, came after a particularly tense series of events. Meghan had been engaged in multiple high-profile projects, some of which reportedly involved media statements and public actions that clashed with royal protocol. While the public celebrated her independence, the palace saw a pattern of behavior that suggested she was operating without accountability, without oversight, and, most importantly, without consideration for the institution she had once pledged to support. Consider, for a moment, the pressure on King Charles. The monarchy is an institution built over centuries, with a careful balance of tradition, public perception, and internal hierarchy. Every decision has repercussions. Every action is analyzed, dissected, and, at times, criticized. Yet here was a situation that threatened to erode not just protocol, but authority itself. If the king failed to act decisively, it could signal weakness, a vulnerability that critics and the public would seize upon. It's also important to recognize the personal dimension. King Charles is not just a monarch. He is a father, a grandfather, and a man navigating complex family dynamics. Meghan's actions, though often justified in her own view, place strain on relationships within the family. Prince William, Princess Anne, and other senior royals reportedly raised concerns, emphasizing the potential damage to the family's cohesion and reputation. Charles, traditionally diplomatic and measured, had to weigh these concerns against his desire to maintain unity, fairness, and control. So what was it that finally tipped the scales? Sources indicate it was a combination of public missteps, strategic leaks, and private concerns. Reports suggest that Meghan had engaged in communications that, intentionally or not, contradicted prior agreements with the royal family. Media appearances that were meant to enhance her image instead exposed rifts, tensions, and conflicts. The palace perceived these actions as not merely independent, but potentially destabilizing. For a king responsible for preserving an institution that spans centuries, this was unacceptable. King Charles's advisors reportedly presented a dossier outlining the risks. It included press statements, interviews, social media activity, and internal communications. Each item painted a picture of behavior that, while perhaps harmless in isolation, collectively suggested a pattern of disregard for royal protocol. The advisors stressed that if action was not taken, the monarchy's credibility could be further eroded and future disputes would escalate. Charles listened, weighing each piece of evidence, knowing that any decision he made would have far-reaching consequences. But beyond the strategic and public considerations, there was a deeply personal element. King Charles had witnessed the strain that Meghan's actions had placed on his son, Prince Harry. He had seen the tension, the arguments, and the emotional toll. The king reportedly felt a complex mixture of frustration, disappointment, and responsibility. His breaking point, insiders say, was not rooted in animosity but in a sense of duty to protect the family, the institution, and the monarchy's legacy. What makes this moment even more striking is that King Charles is known for his patience. He has navigated decades of public scrutiny, family conflict, and political pressure with measured restraint. Yet, even he recognized that certain lines had been crossed. The cumulative effect of repeated provocations, perceived slights, and strategic missteps created a scenario in which decisive action became not just advisable but necessary. The decision to revoke Meghan's visa, in this context, was an extension of that judgment, a clear, formal, and irreversible statement. Sources indicate that the king did not make this decision lightly. There were multiple rounds of consultation, strategy meetings, and careful planning. Advisors debated timing, public reaction, and potential fallout. They discussed alternatives, compromises, and softer measures, but each proposal was ultimately rejected. King Charles was clear. This was a matter of principle, authority, and precedent. To waver now would undermine the monarchy's ability to enforce rules in the future. The letter that arrived at Meghan's door was the culmination of this deliberation. Every word, every phrase, was chosen to convey clarity, authority, and finality. It was not just a legal notice. It was a declaration of the monarchy's position, a demonstration of the king's resolve, and a message to both the public and the family. Certain boundaries cannot be crossed, regardless of fame, influence, or public sentiment. But the breaking point was not only about the letter. It was about timing. King Charles reportedly waited for months, even years, monitoring behavior, gauging public reaction, and consulting with key advisors. He considered the potential impact on the monarchy's image, the family's cohesion, and the public's perception of fairness. And yet, the tipping point arrived suddenly, catalyzed by a convergence of factors that demanded immediate action. Interestingly, insiders suggest that one final incident accelerated the decision. It involved a high-profile public engagement where Meghan reportedly made statements that directly conflicted with prior agreements regarding privacy, protocol, or the representation of the royal family. The event, while seemingly minor to the outside observer, became the spark that lit the fuse. Advisors argue that this action demonstrated a disregard for agreed-upon boundaries, making decisive action unavoidable. The emotional weight of this decision cannot be overstated. King Charles is not known for rash behavior. He has spent decades cultivating patience and diplomacy. But the evidence, combined with the potential risk to the monarchy's credibility, created a scenario in which restraint was no longer feasible. By authorizing the revocation of Meghan's visa, the king sent a message that authority, tradition, and accountability are non-negotiable. And yet, there is a paradox here. While the action was formal and decisive, it also revealed the complexity of familial relationships within the monarchy. The king had to balance his role as father, grandfather, and monarch. He had to consider the impact on Harry and Meghan's children, on public opinion, and on the family's internal dynamics. It was a delicate calculus, one that required both courage and precision. Sources indicate that King Charles's advisors were initially concerned about potential backlash. They predicted intense media scrutiny, public debate, and criticism from royal watchers worldwide. Yet the king remained resolute. He reportedly emphasized that inaction would have far greater consequences than taking decisive measures, no matter how controversial. This perspective underscores a key element of the breaking point. Sometimes, leadership requires decisions that are uncomfortable, unpopular, or even personally challenging. What makes this story even more compelling is that King Charles's breaking point did not occur in isolation. It was part of a larger narrative about authority, accountability, and the challenges of modern royalty. The monarchy exists in a world of constant public scrutiny, social media amplification, and global media coverage. Every action, every misstep, every perceived slight is magnified. The decision to revoke Meghan's visa is not just about her. It is a statement about the institution, its values, and its willingness to enforce boundaries in the face of unprecedented challenges. And just when it seemed the king's decision had been made and the letter had been drafted, an unexpected development occurred behind palace walls. A senior advisor reportedly discovered new information, previously undisclosed evidence that suggested Meghan's actions had broader implications than initially understood. This evidence would play a crucial role in shaping the next steps, influencing both the timing and the scope of the consequences. As the palace prepared to finalize the decision, one thing was clear. King Charles had reached a point where hesitation was no longer an option. The breaking point had been reached, and the letter revoking Meghan's visa was only the first manifestation of a larger strategy. The monarch had acted decisively, balancing authority, family dynamics, and public perception in a way that few could have predicted. And yet, while the king had made his move, Meghan and Harry remained unaware of the full implications. They could see the letter, feel the weight of the action, and anticipate the challenges ahead, but the palace had more in store. The breaking point was just the beginning. The consequences, some of which were already set in motion, had yet to unfold. Most people assumed that Meghan Markle, by virtue of marrying into the British royal family, had access to privileges that were untouchable. After all, she had the title of Duchess of Sussex, a global platform, and connections that opened doors around the world. But there was one privilege that few truly understood, one that Meghan likely took for granted: her UK visa. Not just any visa, but a special arrangement, an exception granted because of her royal ties. And now, it had been revoked. Think about that for a moment. A document that governs your ability to live and work in a country, an official, legal validation of your residency, had been quietly dependent on royal discretion. It wasn't something you could apply for through normal channels, and it certainly wasn't something guaranteed for life. Meghan had assumed it was permanent. She had assumed that the institution she had married into would protect her, that protocol and courtesy would shield her from such measures. But as the letter on her desk made painfully clear, assumptions do not equate to security. To understand the full significance of this, consider the rules governing UK immigration. Ordinary citizens navigate complex legal systems to gain residency. They submit documents, prove income, satisfy background checks, and wait months, or even years, for approval. Meghan, on the other hand, had benefited from a loophole, a rare exception tied directly to her royal connection. The privilege allowed her to bypass some of the usual bureaucratic hurdles and to maintain a legal presence without the typical scrutiny. It was a silent safeguard, one that the public rarely hears about. Yet privileges like this are double-edged. They are conditional. They exist at the discretion of the monarchy and the government. And once that discretion is exercised, once the decision is made to revoke them, the consequences are immediate and inescapable. For Meghan, the realization was crushing. A legal safety net she had never questioned was gone. The security she had relied upon, the freedom she had enjoyed, the confidence she carried in her ability to navigate the UK without legal barriers, it was all stripped away in an instant. The palace, sources reveal, had been monitoring the Sussexes' engagements, both public and private, for some time. Advisors and legal teams observed not only Meghan's media appearances, but also her personal conduct, her interactions with the public, and her business ventures. Every detail was analyzed for potential risk to the monarchy. The conclusion? That her privileges, while once justified, were no longer sustainable under current circumstances. But what exactly made this privilege so unique? Why was Meghan's visa different from any other residency permit? The answer lies in its origin. When Meghan married Prince Harry, she became eligible for certain residency rights not normally available to foreign nationals. These rights were tied to her role as a member of the royal family and granted her legal protections that went beyond standard immigration law. She could travel to the UK with minimal oversight, live in royal estates if necessary, and participate in activities that might otherwise require formal visas or approvals. It was a silent acknowledgement of her position within the monarchy, an unspoken safeguard granted by tradition and precedent. However, privileges granted by tradition are fragile. They exist at the mercy of those in power. And in this case, the power rested firmly with King Charles. Once he decided that these privileges should no longer apply, Meghan's legal status was instantly vulnerable. The revocation of her visa wasn't a bureaucratic formality, it was a statement. It was a demonstration of authority and a signal to both Meghan and the public. No one, not even a duchess, is above the rules when the monarchy deems action necessary. To grasp the psychological impact of this revocation, imagine the following scenario. For years, Meghan had navigated life with a sense of legal and social security. She traveled to the UK knowing she had authority, protection, and status. She participated in charitable events, media appearances, and social engagements with confidence, assured that her royal ties offered a safety net. Now, that net had been cut away. Suddenly, every step she took in the UK carried legal risk. Every public appearance could be questioned, every private move scrutinized. The sense of freedom she had relied upon vanished overnight. Legal experts explain that this type of revocation is almost unprecedented for someone of Meghan's stature. It is extremely rare for the monarchy or government to remove residency rights from a former royal in such a direct manner. Typically, disputes of this nature are handled quietly, with negotiation and compromise. Yet in Meghan's case, the decision was both deliberate and absolute. The message was clear: privileges, however generous or protective, are conditional, and crossing certain boundaries triggers consequences. But the revocation also highlighted a critical tension in Meghan's perception of her life. She had always seen herself as independent, self-assured, and capable of navigating challenges. The assumption that her royal connection would provide unassailable protection was deeply ingrained. Now, she was confronted with the stark reality that independence does not equal invulnerability. Power and privilege can be revoked, influence can be challenged, and even the most meticulously curated image cannot shield someone from consequences. As Meghan absorbed the reality of her situation, reports suggest that she began questioning every choice she had made since leaving the UK. Every project, every public statement, every media appearance was suddenly under scrutiny, not by the media, but by the authority that governed her privileges. The revocation of her visa forced her to confront the limits of her autonomy, and the fact that a single decision by King Charles could disrupt her entire world. At the same time, Harry was acutely aware of the precariousness of the situation. As Meghan processed the news, he began considering the broader implications. Their life in the United States offered distance, but the legal and symbolic consequences in the UK were profound. Travel restrictions, media scrutiny, and limitations on engagement with UK institutions now loomed large. And while Harry had previously relied on his own royal ties to buffer challenges, he quickly realized that even his position offered limited protection when the king's decision was firm. One source close to the Sussexes described the atmosphere as tense and surreal. For Meghan, the sense of security she had always relied upon evaporated. For Harry, the situation was a complex puzzle of loyalty, strategy, and familial responsibility. The couple was forced to confront a reality that few outside the palace walls could fully comprehend: that privileges, no matter how long-standing, are never guaranteed when the monarchy decides they are no longer appropriate. Interestingly, the privilege Meghan had relied upon was not just legal, it was symbolic. It represented a tacit acknowledgement of her status, influence, and connection to the royal family. Losing it was more than a bureaucratic setback. It was a diminishment of perceived authority. For someone whose life and career are closely tied to public perception, this type of revocation carries psychological weight that is difficult to quantify. It is a subtle but profound shift in power dynamics, signaling that her influence, while real, is subject to oversight and control by those who hold ultimate authority. As advisors within the palace prepared to communicate the decision, they reportedly debated the wording, timing, and potential impact of the revocation. The goal was not just to enforce a legal measure, but to assert the principle that privileges granted by royal association are conditional. By doing so, they aimed to reinforce the monarchy's authority, preserve institutional integrity, and send a clear message to both Meghan and the broader public: status alone does not confer immunity. For Meghan, the revocation of her visa also triggered a cascade of personal reflections. She had built a brand, cultivated relationships, and pursued projects under the assumption that her royal association offered unparalleled security. Now, that foundation had been shaken. Every plan, every ambition, every public engagement would require reassessment. Legal challenges, media management, and strategic recalibration became urgent priorities. And while Meghan is known for resilience and adaptability, Even she had to confront the reality that some challenges are more formidable than anticipated. Yet the situation contained an element of irony. Meghan had long positioned herself as independent, self-reliant, and capable of navigating life outside the traditional constraints of royalty. Ironically, it was precisely her independence, her boldness, and her public visibility that contributed to the revocation of a privilege she may have assumed was permanent. In attempting to define herself outside the monarchy, she had inadvertently triggered a response that reminded her, in stark terms, of the boundaries she once operated within. As this reality set in, the Sussexes had to make critical decisions quickly. Legal counsel was engaged. Strategies were debated. Media approaches were considered. Every step required careful calculation, as the potential consequences extended far beyond the immediate revocation. Travel, business, charitable work, and family interactions, all were now subject to a new layer of complexity. And yet, despite the gravity of the moment, there was a lingering uncertainty. Sources indicate that the palace had not yet disclosed the full extent of the consequences. The revocation of the visa was just the beginning. Hidden within the broader strategy were measures that could impact Meghan's influence, her career, and even her ability to interact with key institutions in the UK. The full scope of these actions remained undisclosed, adding another layer of tension to an already fraught situation. Privilege, it seems, is never guaranteed. Legal protections, no matter how exceptional, can be revoked. Influence, no matter how strong, can be constrained. And for Meghan Markle, the revocation of her visa represented not just a legal shift, but a profound confrontation with reality. It forced her to reassess assumptions, question strategies, and prepare for challenges that few could predict. As Meghan stared at the letter that signaled the loss of her privilege, she realized that this was more than a bureaucratic setback. It was a challenge to her autonomy, a test of resilience, and a warning from an institution that had tolerated boldness but would not endure repeated defiance. The privilege she had taken for granted, the freedom she had assumed was permanent, had vanished. And the most shocking revelation? This revocation, while monumental, was only the first ripple. Hidden consequences were already in motion, consequences that could shape Meghan's life, Harry's response, and the broader public narrative in ways that neither of them anticipated. When the letter arrived, Prince Harry's world shifted in ways few could imagine. The man who had always projected confidence, resilience, and a careful balance between independence and royal duty suddenly found himself facing a crisis that no amount of preparation could have fully anticipated. For Harry, this was not just a legal or bureaucratic issue. It was personal, familial, and deeply emotional. Imagine standing in his living room in California, watching the woman you love grapple with the implications of a letter that could redefine both of your lives. Imagine the sense of helplessness that creeps in, the weight of responsibility pressing down, and the uncertainty of what steps to take next. For Harry, that moment was profound. The letter revoking Meghan's UK visa was not just a notice. It was a declaration that challenged the very foundations of their shared life. From the outside, Harry had always been viewed as protective, assertive, and capable of handling high-pressure situations. But this was different. This wasn't a media scandal, an interview misstep, or a public controversy. This was a direct action from the monarchy, authorized by his father, the king, affecting the woman he had vowed to protect and the family he had worked to build. Suddenly, the stakes were unprecedented. Harry's first instinct, according to sources close to the Sussexes, was to shield Meghan from the immediate fallout. He tried to manage her stress, offering reassurance, analyzing the letter, and considering potential responses. But he quickly realized that this was not something that could be mitigated by comfort alone. The revocation carried legal implications, international consequences, and public ramifications that required a calculated strategy. He picked up the phone, contacting lawyers who specialized in immigration and royal law. Conversations that might have taken days were condensed into hours. Legal advisors pored over statutes, previous precedents, and potential loopholes, searching for a path that could restore some semblance of security. But the consensus was grim. The king's decision was final, legally defensible, and strategically absolute. There was little room for negotiation. But Harry's reaction was more than legal strategizing. Emotionally, he felt a surge of frustration, betrayal, and helplessness. He had watched Meghan navigate intense scrutiny, attacks on her character, and invasive media coverage, all while maintaining composure and grace. Now, despite all her resilience, the letter reminded him that no one, royal or not, was immune from the institution's authority. The very system he had been part of for most of his life had drawn a line, and it cut through their family's security. Sources indicate that Harry considered the broader implications as well. Beyond Meghan's personal and legal challenges, there were questions about their children's future. Would this revocation affect their ability to travel? Could it influence custody arrangements, schooling, or public engagements? While the letter did not explicitly mention the children, Harry knew the monarchy's decisions rarely exist in isolation. Every action reverberates, and he was acutely aware of the potential ripple effects. The emotional stakes were high. Harry, who had previously confronted public scrutiny, family disagreements, and international attention with a mix of diplomacy and defiance, now faced a deeply personal dilemma. He had to reconcile loyalty to his wife with respect for his family, navigate public perception, and manage the media narrative, all while processing the reality that his father, the man he had once admired and sought guidance from, had taken a direct action against the woman he loved. At one point, sources reveal, Harry was seen pacing the living room, trying to absorb the enormity of the situation. He asked himself questions that had no easy answers. How do we respond without escalating tension? How do we protect our family? How do we maintain dignity in the face of a decision that feels both punitive and personal? These questions were not just logistical. They were emotional, testing the limits of his resilience and judgment. Harry also considered the public implications. Social media was already buzzing with speculation. Royal commentators, journalists, and fans began to dissect the situation even before official statements could be issued. Every move he and Meghan made would be scrutinized, analyzed, and potentially weaponized by both supporters and critics. The pressure was immense. Unlike ordinary citizens facing legal challenges, every decision they made was amplified on a global stage. Interestingly, sources suggest that Harry's protective instincts were matched by a strategic mindset. He began drafting possible responses, both public and private. Statements were considered, messaging was analyzed, and potential allies within the legal and media spheres were identified. He understood that the revocation was more than a personal affront. It was a message from the monarchy, and how he responded would set the tone for future interactions. Yet even as he strategized, Harry's emotional response was raw. Privately, he reportedly expressed frustration and disappointment at the perceived betrayal. He had long navigated the complexities of royal life, balancing personal autonomy with public expectation. Now, he was confronted with the stark reality that autonomy had limits, and privilege could be revoked unilaterally. For someone who prided himself on loyalty, fairness, and protecting his family, the situation was profoundly disorienting. Harry also faced difficult conversations with his advisors. Legal teams debated the likelihood of appealing the decision or challenging it through other channels. PR teams explored messaging strategies that would frame the revocation as a procedural matter rather than a personal attack. Every scenario had risks, and every choice carried potential consequences. Harry had to weigh each option carefully, knowing that the wrong move could exacerbate an already volatile situation. Sources indicate that at one point, Harry considered traveling to the UK to address the issue in person. The idea was quickly deemed risky. Attempting to enter the country without proper authorization could result in enforcement action, legal complications, or further strain on family relationships. The realization was sobering. Even his status as a prince did not guarantee safe passage. The monarchy had drawn a clear boundary, and crossing it could have serious repercussions. Amid the chaos, Harry reportedly found moments of reflection. He considered the trajectory of his life, from childhood in the public eye to military service, from marrying Meghan to stepping back from official royal duties. Each chapter had tested him, but the revocation of her visa introduced a new, unprecedented challenge. It was a moment that demanded resilience, strategic thinking, and emotional intelligence in equal measure. And yet, despite the seriousness of the situation, there were moments of human vulnerability. Sources reveal that Harry confided in a small circle of trusted friends, expressing fear, frustration, and even anger. He questioned the motivations behind the revocation, the timing, and the potential long-term consequences. These conversations were deeply personal, offering insight into the emotional toll that decisions made at the highest levels of power can have on individuals. At the same time, Harry's sense of duty to his family was unwavering. He recognized that Meghan, while resilient, needed support, not just legal or strategic, but emotional. He remained steadfast in his commitment to protect her, to advocate for her, and to navigate the complex landscape of royal authority with care and precision. The challenge was immense, but Harry's determination was equally formidable. Yet there was an underlying tension that could not be ignored. Sources suggest that even as Harry strategized, he was acutely aware of the potential for conflict with his father. King Charles had acted decisively, and any response by Harry risked escalating tensions within the family. The delicate balance of loyalty, authority, and personal conviction created a scenario in which every action had consequences, both immediate and long-term. And just when it seemed that Harry's response might stabilize the situation, new intelligence surfaced. Reports indicate that palace insiders had prepared additional measures that could extend beyond visa revocation, potentially impacting Meghan's professional projects, travel plans, and public engagements. Harry's strategy now had to account for variables that were only partially visible, increasing the complexity and urgency of every decision. The weight of responsibility was clear. Harry had to manage legal implications, public perception, familial loyalty, and the emotional well-being of his wife and children, all while navigating a system designed to maintain absolute authority. Sources suggest that he spent hours in private reflection, considering not only immediate tactics, but long-term consequences. Every step had to be calculated, every move deliberate. And yet, the emotional reality remained raw. Harry, who had spent years protecting, advocating, and fighting for his family, now faced a challenge that tested his limits. The revocation of Meghan's visa was not just a legal obstacle. It was a symbolic act, a reminder that even the most visible, influential, and protected individuals are subject to consequences when boundaries are crossed. As Harry contemplated next steps, one fact became increasingly clear: this crisis was far from over. The letter that had arrived at Meghan's door was just the beginning. Hidden consequences, undisclosed measures, and potential escalations loomed on the horizon. Harry knew that every choice he made could influence not just their immediate situation, but the broader narrative surrounding the Sussexes, the monarchy, and the public's perception of both. And as he sat in quiet reflection, a sense of determination emerged. Harry understood that protecting Meghan, navigating the legal complexities, and responding to the monarchy's authority would require resilience, strategy, and emotional fortitude. But he also realized that the path forward was uncertain, the stakes were high, and the consequences, both visible and hidden, were only beginning to unfold. The moment the news of Meghan Markle's UK visa revocation broke, a storm unlike any other engulfed the public consciousness. Headlines flashed across screens worldwide. Duchess of Sussex stripped of UK privileges, royal authority reasserted. Meghan faces consequences, King Charles draws a line. Social media exploded with speculation, analysis, and outrage. The public was divided, commentators were in overdrive, and the palace, though careful in its messaging, could not contain the tidal wave of attention. From the outset, the story captivated audiences because it was unprecedented. Rarely had a former royal, especially one with Meghan's fame and influence, faced such direct consequences. People were shocked not only by the act itself, but by the symbolism it carried. This was more than a legal maneuver. It was a public assertion of authority, a reminder that privilege has limits, even when it appears limitless. Consider the first reactions online. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, platforms buzzed with opinions, memes, and conspiracy theories. Supporters of Meghan decried the decision as harsh, unfair, and emblematic of an institution clinging desperately to outdated traditions. Critics praised the monarchy's decisive action, framing it as a necessary step to maintain order and authority. Every post, Every comment and every viral video added fuel to the growing inferno. But the storm was not merely digital. Mainstream media jumped into the fray with relentless coverage. News anchors dissected the situation on live broadcasts, panelists debated its implications for the monarchy, and reporters scoured historical precedent for context. Headlines were crafted to evoke maximum emotional impact. Royal rift deepens. Privilege revoked. Meghan faces new reality. King Charles shows strength in face of challenge. The media frenzy amplified the drama, ensuring that the story would dominate public discourse for weeks, if not months. The public's fascination can be understood on several levels. First, Meghan Markle is a global figure whose life has been a spectacle since her engagement to Prince Harry. Every interview, appearance, and statement has been scrutinized. Second, the decision to revoke her visa challenged perceptions of royalty and celebrity. For many, Meghan represented independence, modernity, and defiance of tradition. Seeing her confronted with consequences was shocking, jarring, and deeply compelling. Adding to the storm was the timing. The news arrived just as Meghan and Harry had been ramping up professional and charitable initiatives in the UK and abroad. Their visibility was at a peak, and public attention was already focused on their endeavors. The revocation of her visa, therefore, did not occur in a vacuum. It struck at the heart of ongoing projects, engagements, and the narrative the Sussexes had been crafting for years. The result was a perfect storm of public scrutiny and media sensationalism. Public reactions were immediate and intense. Royal watchers dissected every detail: the wording of the letter, the timing of the announcement, the possible motivations behind the decision. Analysts debated whether this was a personal rebuke from King Charles or a strategic move to reinforce institutional authority. Social media sentiment oscillated wildly, from fierce condemnation of the monarchy to vitriolic criticism of Meghan herself. The intensity of the discourse reflected not only the public's fascination with the Sussexes, but also the deep cultural and emotional resonance of the monarchy in contemporary society. Interestingly, the backlash was not uniform. Some segments of the public expressed empathy for Meghan, emphasizing her challenges as a woman of color navigating a historically white, patriarchal institution. Others focused on Harry's role, debating whether his attempts to protect Meghan had inadvertently exacerbated tensions. Still others framed the story in terms of protocol, authority, and tradition, arguing that the monarchy's action was justified to maintain order and credibility. The diversity of perspectives ensured that the storm would not subside quickly. The palace, aware of the brewing tempest, implemented a calculated media strategy. Statements were carefully worded, emphasizing legal and procedural rationale without descending into overt commentary. Advisors aimed to contain speculation while signaling that the decision was deliberate, considered, and rooted in principle. Yet, even with careful messaging, controlling the narrative proved impossible. The story had escaped the confines of official channels, spreading rapidly through both traditional media and digital platforms. Behind the scenes, advisors monitored sentiment metrics, social media trends, and international press coverage. Every new article, tweet, or broadcast was analyzed for potential impact. The palace recognized that public perception mattered as much as the legal reality, and that failure to manage the narrative could undermine not only the decision but the monarchy's authority more broadly. The public storm also revealed deep-seated tensions between tradition and modernity. Meghan's persona embodies a blend of celebrity culture, modern feminism, and global influence, which often clashes with centuries-old protocols and expectations. For many observers, the revocation of her visa was symbolic of the ongoing struggle between individual autonomy and institutional authority. It was a moment that crystallized the conflict between personal ambition and the weight of tradition, a conflict that resonates far beyond the royal family. Amid the chaos, some unexpected voices emerged. Former palace insiders, journalists, and even members of the royal family's extended network offered commentary, speculating on motives, predicting consequences, and revealing behind-the-scenes dynamics. Some hinted at prior warnings Meghan may have received. Others suggested that King Charles's decision was part of a broader strategy to assert control over the family and prevent future challenges to authority. These revelations fueled public curiosity and amplified the storm. Meanwhile, Meghan's supporters mobilized quickly. Online petitions, social media campaigns, and public statements emphasized her contributions, her resilience, and the perceived injustice of the revocation. Influencers, celebrities, and human rights advocates weighed in, framing the narrative in terms of fairness, equality, and protection from institutional overreach. The movement added a new layer of intensity, transforming what could have been a private legal matter into a global spectacle. On the other side, critics focused on protocol, authority, and precedent. Royal commentators argued that the revocation was necessary to maintain order and credibility. They highlighted past examples of royals or high-profile individuals facing consequences for crossing boundaries, emphasizing that status does not confer immunity. These arguments, amplified by traditional media, created a polarized environment in which every statement, action, or social media post became fodder for debate. The storm was further intensified by the timing of other royal events. With high-profile engagements, charitable initiatives, and public appearances ongoing, the revocation became a narrative focal point. Every press release, public photo, or media interview was scrutinized for context, interpretation, and potential symbolism. The public was hungry for insight, and every detail was dissected with relentless intensity. And then came the leaks. Anonymous sources, journalists, and insiders began sharing alleged details about palace deliberations, private conversations, and strategic considerations. Some reports suggested prior warnings had been issued. Others hinted at secret meetings, internal conflicts, and strategic calculations designed to ensure the monarchy's authority remained intact. These leaks fueled speculation, heightened emotions, and added a layer of intrigue to an already explosive story. Social media, in particular, became a battlefield. Memes, viral videos, and hashtags proliferated, framing the situation in ways both humorous and serious. Supporters and critics clashed in comment sections, while algorithms amplified the most engaging and often most polarizing content. The storm was no longer just a news story. It had become a cultural event, with real-time engagement and global attention. Public reactions were not uniform across borders. In the United States, Meghan's home country, commentary often emphasized her independence, resilience, and the challenges of navigating a foreign monarchy. In the United Kingdom, debates focused on protocol, authority, and the symbolism of the revocation. International observers offered perspectives ranging from fascination to analysis of institutional power. This global attention magnified the intensity of the situation, ensuring